Today we will be discussing a very important topic in British literature, that is about the novel form. So what is meant by novel? What are the major features of the novel, and also which are the important types of novel? All these things we will discuss in this video lecture. And when we talk about the novel, the term novel is actually derived from the French word novelle, and this term was actually used before 18th century for short fictions or small kind of stories related to love, etc. So after or around the end of the neoclassical period, we can see the emergence of this novel form. Actually, beginning it was not exactly in a novel form. We can see prototype of novels like Robinson Crusoe or Samuel Richardson's Pamela. These are all the novel forms during the starting phase of this literary genre. So all these things we will discuss in this video lecture. So when we define the novel form, we need to note that novel is actually a kind of literary genre in which a narrative of considerable length is there, which is unfolded by the actions of the characters, speech and thought processes. So we need to note that the story or the plot line of the novel always contains the daily life happenings, or it is more closer to the lifestyle of the normal human beings. So because of this reason, we need to note that novel became much prominent during the 18th century. And we need to also note that novel is actually a cultural instrument which actually help us to understand the cultural aspects or the social background of a particular time period in which it is written. That means the way people speak and talk, the cultural or the time or space in which a particular human being or a particular society lives, or how we feel, how the inner thought processes of an individual is, all these things we can know or understand with the after reading a novel. So that is actually the major advantage of the novel while we compare to other literary forms like drama or tragedy, etc. So with the emergence of middle class during this 18th century, we need to note that novel became very much prominent during that time period. And apart from that, we need to note that the literacy rate also was higher during that time, and more people get educated and more people can read the novel. So due to these reasons, we need to note that novel became very much prominent during the 18th, 19th and also the upcoming 20th centuries, and slowly the performances, dramatic performances became less prominent comparing to the popularity of the novel. So etymologically speaking, we need to note that the novel form or the prototypes of the novel came into being during the first half of the 18th century with the arrival of Philip Sidney's Arcadia and Alf Rabin's Orinoco, etc. So later we need to note that during the end time period, we can see the four wheels of English literature like Daniel Defoe, Henry Fielding, Tobias Smollett and also Samuel Richardson. They are called the four wheels of English novel. So with the arrival of these people, the novel form got a new face, okay, which is more like a prose style apart from the dialogue forms. So this is very important because the time period of neoclassical period actually was the age of prose and reason, and with an evolution we can see this novel form also got its popularity during this time period. So we need to note that there are many factors that helped in the development of the English novel, and one such reason is that during that time period literacy rate of the people was too high, and most of them got educated, and which made them able to read and write English language. So reading novel became much easy for the common people apart from watching the theatre dramas. And also due to the rise or development of the printing press, a large number of literary works or books can be printed at a very cheaper rate during that time. So comparing to the amount people need to give at the theatres to watch a drama, it became much convenient for them to read a novel, and in their private spaces or study or inside a room, in a private manner they were able to read the novel also. That is also an advantage. And we need to note that this industrialization, middle class life, all these things actually emphasizes on the element of capitalism, which gives more importance to the individual freedom, okay, rather than coming into public. So that kind of idea also people had during that time, and novel is one such of type of genre of literary work or kind of a medium of pleasure which can be seeked in a private kind of setup inside a room or inside without any interaction with the other human beings. So that also became a factor for development of this novel form. So we can see a development of printing press, development of industrialization, and also we need to note that during the time period there was the glorious revolution. We need to know in British history we can understand, if we check the history, we need to note, we can understand that during that time period the rule of monarchy or the king rule was less popular during that time, and people were favoring the democratic kind of setup. So that gives more importance to individual freedom. And in these novels, the subjects discussed in the novels were mostly based on the life of the common people, their struggles, how they are overcoming that. So such topics were taken as story plotline in these kinds of novels, and this was much favorable to the common people. So they preferred to read more novels comparing to the other literary forms during that time, and this is also a very important reason for the development of the novel form. So until now we discussed how the novel as a literary genre developed. It developed in the first half of the 18th century, and it came into prominence during the end of the 18th century, and the rise of the middle class, the development of printing press, and people's attitude towards their life, which means giving emphasis to individual freedom and capitalism, also give more popularity to the novel, because this novel, the subject matters taken for the novels were greatly connected with the life of the common people, how they live, how they survive during the difficult times, all these things. So when we talk about some examples, you will clearly understand these kinds of things. So now we will discuss the most important types of novels. So talking about types of novels, we can see many types of novels like epistolary novel, Bildungsroman, epic novel, psychological novel, etc. So one by one we will discuss in this second part of this video lecture. So first type of novel we are going to discuss is epistolary novel. So what is meant by epistolary novel? You need to note that epistolary novel is something which is written in a letter form. So the best example for epistolary novel is Samuel Richardson's Pamela. So actually Pamela is actually written, most of the pages are written in a letter form. So that's why it is called an epistolary novel. So we can see the protagonist in the novel is Pamela, who is actually a girl who, according to the novelist, maintains her virtue until the end of the story. So Pamela, when we see, she is actually a servant working under Mr. B, and Mr. B tries to tempt her and try to make her as a mistress, but she will not she will resist his advances, and finally when Mr. B agrees to take her as wife or marry her, so during that time only Pamela will accept Mr. B's proposal. So that kind of story it is, and its subtitle is The Virtue Rewarded. And we need to note that the writing style of the novel is actually important here. So Pamela is actually discussing her life story as a letter, as if she is writing letter to her parents who are staying far away. So readers who read the novel or the book will understand like Pamela is writing some letters to the parents discussing or describing what all things are going on in her life. Mr. B trying to tempt her, asking her to be the mistress, finally marrying her. All those things readers are actually understanding through letter forms. So that is meant by epistolary novel. So next we will discuss what is meant by realistic novel. So realistic novel, actually the term realistic is actually connected with the terms realism and naturalism. So actually while we write a novel, that kind of realistic novel always includes such a writing style so that the readers will get a very pictorial, realistic feel. The story will be depicted in a great detail and the audience will get a clearer picture. In their mind they will get a clearer picture of what the author is describing, and when the characters goes to some places, the pictorial representation, how the nature is, how the surrounding is, how the background is, all these things will be discussed in great detail in realistic novels. So when we speak about an example of a realistic novel, we can take Robinson Crusoe as the best example. Robinson Crusoe was written in 1719 and it actually tells the story of this Crusoe who was actually he's actually basically a traveler in a ship, and once in between the novel we can see him stranded in an island without any food or any other human beings to accompany him. So that time period, how he survives, that is actually the main element in the novel. So this is more like connected with the life of a common man, because if we ourselves, if we are stranded in an island, how we will survive, how our survival instincts work, all these things are actually discussed through a journalistic form in this Robinson Crusoe. So when a reader reads this novel, they can identify with themselves the life happenings and how the survival methods that Robinson Crusoe uses. So that's why it is more realistic. We can even have a pictorial kind of connection with the island in which Robinson Crusoe is stranded. So finally he escaped from the island. That is how the novel is based on. And also it is written in a more journal kind of form, Robinson Crusoe. So that also you need to understand. That is an example for realistic novel. Next type of novel is philosophical novel. So from the word philosophy itself, philosophical, we can understand that what the novel will be based on. So actually the author will try to give a message in the novel which is actually indirectly criticizes the problems of the society during that time. So best example we can take is Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, written in 1726. So actually he will try to explain the problems or the hypocrisy of the society during that time period through his character in Gulliver's Travels. So actually during the travel he will first go to an island where there are people are too small people. Next he will go to an island where people are too huge giant monsters. So and their society have their own rules and regulations, and those few things are actually absurd according to the protagonist, and he will also think about the place from which he comes. So that is Britain or England. So he also understood there are many problems or rules that are too absurd or too irrelevant to the current situation. So that kind of way the author is actually Swift is trying to indirectly criticize the society by imparting some kind of philosophy in the novel. So that's why it is more like a philosophical novel, we can say. Now a most important type of novel we are going to discuss, that is epic novel. So what is meant by epic novel? Actually epic is something which have a grand style of narrative. So we can see only complete epic in English literature is our Paradise Lost by John Milton. So just like that, this epic novel form will adopt a grand kind of style while narrating this kind of story or the plot line. So for best example we can say Tom Jones. So actually Tom Jones is not exactly like an epic, it's more like a little bit making fun of the epic also, we can say. So Tom Jones is more like a negative, an anti-hero type of character. He is not actually a very good character during the beginning. He will take part in many negative things, and finally, and because of this reason he have to suffer a lot also, and finally things will be in good condition and climax will end in a happy manner. So that kind of novel is Tom Jones, and it is more like an epic novel. So it will be having a grand style of narrative, but not completely. It will not be a serious kind of epic, more like making fun also sometime, we can say. But the novel structure is more like in a prose written form. That much you need to know. Next type of novel is experimental novel. So what is meant by experimental novel? So even the term itself gives a clue actually. The best example is Lawrence Turner's Tristram Shandy. So you need to note that it was written in 1759, and actually the problem is that why it is experimental is because the novel actually moves away from many kinds of conventional narrative techniques. So if we look stories like Tom Jones, novels like our Gulliver's Travels, or any kind of like Robinson Crusoe, there is actually a perfect starting, middle and end in an order. It maintains an order actually, the story plot line. But here in Tristram Shandy, we need to note that a proper order is not maintained by the writer. So the reader will also become bored by reading it. It won't be that much entertaining for the audience also, but it is more like an experimental. Actually the human life or the human thought processes are like that. That is the indirect message that the author tries to give. So in Tristram Shandy we can even, actually the full form is like the life of Tristram Shandy, that kind of way it is actually starting. But we need to note that the novel does not talk much about the life of Tristram Shandy. Instead of that, it actually talks about even years before his birth. And actually the irony is that even Tristram Shandy itself is a narrator. Like that way the story goes, and he is actually talking about himself, even the things which happened before his birth. So it is very absurd actually. So, and there are also many blank pages left in between. So it's more like an experimental novel actually. It is actually not made to entertain the audience. It is actually made to give a new feel to the audience. That's why it is more like an experimental novel. A new type of writing style is adopted. That's why it becomes experimental. So experimental novel is also an important type of novel that we need to know. So we are going to the last type of novel for today, that is Bildungsroman. So Bildungsroman is actually a type of novel form in which it is also called as novel of development or novel of education. So we also talk about this Tom Jones or Jane Eyre. When we talk about these kinds of novels, these characters are actually in a phase of development. At the beginning of the novel, these characters don't have much kind of knowledge about themselves, don't have a specific personality. But towards the end of the novel, they will develop. They will grow. They are mentally also, physically also. In Jane Eyre, we can see she is actually a little kid during the beginning course of the novel. But later, she will, when she become mature, she will also mentally also develop. She will know how to become stern, how to give emphasis on her personality, and finally, she developed herself. So that is more like a developmental kind of novel, which is Bildungsroman. So a novel in which the character shows development, or education, more realization or maturity, those kind of characters imparted in a novel, that kind of novel we can call as Bildungsroman. So that is a very important type of novel form in English novel. So that's all for today's video lecture. I hope that this video is helpful for you, and also we will come with some another very attractive or interesting topics which will be useful for your exams and also for competitive examinations like UGC GATE examinations. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you and have a nice day.